Hello and welcome to the next module in the Leviton Security and Automation training series. This module is going to focus on security, specifically on the intruder alarm functionality of the Leviton Security and Automation platform. Security is an interesting thing. It's an area that's actually quite nice to integrate with home automation. Some of these quotes you can see here before you. The intruder alarm does give you lots of useful information. For example, whether there's somebody in the house or not. So when someone leaves the house and arms the alarm in away mode, that's useful information for triggering automation tasks such as turning lights off, turning audio zones off, turning TVs off, setting the thermostats back to save energy whilst you're away. And then when the user comes home and disarms the alarm, you know who it is that's come in and based on their code, and you may well set the house up to their preferences. And then you've got all the sensors, the PIRs and door contacts that are dotted around the property, which aren't used for anything useful apart from the alarm. But of course, with if you can integrate that with the home automation system, you can be using that for intelligent activities such as, detecting occupancy in a room, to sort of manage, lighting, and maybe turning lighting on when doors open, and useful things like that. So it is very nice to be able to integrate the security with the home automation, and that's one thing that makes Leviton stand out. It is the only home automation and building automation for residential and commercial purposes with a fully integrated intruder alarm. So that does make it pretty unique and opens up lots of potential. The Omni is the main controller and intruder alarm as part of the Leviton LS&A platform, which hopefully you will have gathered from the introductory module, which I'm hoping you've listened to before this one. And you should also glean from that module that we have 3 controllers, small, medium and large. The Pro 2 is the large one. They've all got the same hardware. They just basically have software limits and different price points. The idea is that it enables you to, cost optimize the right controller for the project. If it's a big project, I would say always go with the Pro. That gives you maximum flexibility because you never know what your customer might well throw at you. The Pro can handle 192 security zones and 64 thermostats, so it can handle some pretty big properties. The 2E is the middle-sized one, and then the LTE is the small one. That goes down to 16 wired zones and 16 wireless security zones. And 4 thermostats. So the LTE is great for MDU, flats, small projects, anything that's budget sensitive. You're working for a developer, maybe anything that's tight on budget. Then the LTE allows you to still play in that segment. So you've got a controller for every size and budget. Quick word on security. Generally speaking, there's quite a lot of misinformation out there and fear, uncertainty and doubt about dabbling in the security industry. First and foremost, it's absolutely not illegal or anything like that for anyone to install an intruder alarm. So anybody can install an alarm system in a house. If, however, you want to get into police response, i.e. having the police called out when your alarm goes off, then you need to have some approvals in place. And you as an installer need to either be SSAIB or NSI approved. The equipment needs to comply with EN 50131 and be graded, and PD 6662 in the UK. In order to be able to get police response, the system also needs to be monitored by a monitoring station. And then if you have all those certifications, you can then get a unique reference number for the property, and the monitoring station can then call the police if it's a confirmed alarm. The good news is that our Omni is compliant to these regulations, so you can absolutely use our kit if you have those certifications, or you partner with a company, with a security company that has those certifications. You can absolutely use the Omni and achieve grade 2 security level and get police response. However, if you haven't got those certifications and you don't partner with someone and don't want to partner with someone, it's not the end of the world. Quite frankly, the bulk of alarm systems are not monitored and don't go to the police. There are other steps. I mean, the other end of the spectrum is the alarm panel has got a built-in dialer, and it can phone your mobile and let you know, and call a series of mobiles to let you know your alarm's going off, so you can take action. You might check your cameras, and if you see an intruder, you're totally at liberty to call the police yourself. In fact, if you do confirm that the intruder's on site, the police have a tendency to want to get there to see if they can try and actually catch them. And then there's a middle option whereby you can have it monitored by a monitoring station and have what I'll call a private security, or what's more commonly known as a key holder service, where the monitoring station, if they confirm the alarm is correct, is valid, they can call out a private security company to come and attend sites and check over the property and secure any broken windows or anything of that nature. And a lot of customers prefer the private security option. You can pay extra and have agreed call out times in terms of SLAs, and it's a little bit more perhaps dependable, because the police don't make any guarantees that they'll come to site if they're called, or indeed how long they'll take to get there. So you do absolutely have a number of options if you're not SSAIB or NSA approved. If you do go the monitored route, we have a built-in dialer on the platform using Contact ID, which you may think of as a digi-dialer, which can report zone types, can report when the alarm is armed and disarmed and who did it, AC power failure if zones are bypassed, and you can also set it up for weekly or daily test calls to it, like a keep alive mechanism. Dualcom is also a well-known system in the UK marketplace, where you can sign up to that service, and they provide you a box that plugs into the broadband and also has a built-in SIM card, so it can connect to the monitoring station both either over the internet or over the mobile network. That's why it's a dual communication path. But of course, for monitoring, private key holder service or Dualcom connectivity, that's a monthly fee, which is fine if that's what the customer wants. Some customers don't want that, in which case you can revert back to the basic option of having the platform call a list of mobiles directly, and there's no monthly fees, no monthly costs, and the end user deals with it themselves. Okay, just looking at the controller, we did go over that a little bit on the introductory video, so hopefully you know what the main controller looks like, but we're going to dive in a bit more detail into some of the connectivity on those two connection strips on the bottom of the panel. Top left, starting up here, you've got an earth point that you should earth to a clean earth point in the property. 24 volt AC power powers the main system. There's also a battery cable for battery backup purposes as well, which you should absolutely install. Then we have two banks of 12 volt outputs here, 12 volt and ground switched, and then there's two 12 volt and grounds auxiliary. The 12 volt ground auxiliaries are just 12 volt outputs to power PIRs and any powered device you like. You've got a maximum of 1 amp draw you can draw off the panel, so just make sure you stay within that envelope. If you do exceed that, then there's an electronic fuse that will trip to protect itself, and then you can remove some items and then hit the reset button to restore it. The switched 12 volts outputs are very good because they're very good for smoke detectors. Smoke detectors latch when they go off, so even when the smoke clears, they're still in alarm. And typically you power cycle them to reset them. So when you wire smoke detectors into the system here, when you turn them off from the keypad on the alarm, then it'll just power cycle the switched outputs to reset smoke detectors for you. Also, there is an option in PC Access to set them up with confirmed fire. And what happens then is if the smoke detector detects smoke, it will turn the smoke detector off, turn it back on again, and if it does detect smoke for a second time, then it's a confirmed activation that you've had it twice from the smoke detector, so then it sounds, so that can avoid any false triggers. So that's what the switched outputs are for. The auxiliary outputs are permanent and battery, and they're all battery backed up. Console, this is the keypad, wires into here. We'll talk more about that later. The sounders plug into here. We'll talk more about that later as well. Outputs, you have 8 outputs here. These are 12-volt outputs, and you can use these to control things. You can switch things off and on, power relays. You want to switch a 240-volt relay to switch off and on the boiler or a pool pump or something. You can take the 12-volt and ground from here into a relay and switch whatever you like. So you've got 8 of those, and as you know, there's the expansion panel where you can add more with the expansion enclosure, 16 at a time. Over here, you've got the telephone dialer. This is where the telephone connection wires in. We'll cover that more later. And then down here, you've got 16 inputs. These are zone inputs for your PIRs and door contactors, or anything that gives you a volt-free contact closure that you want to trigger from. Just one little side note is that if you use any of the wired thermostats, then they do wire in on zone 16 and output 8. So you do lose a zone and an output when you use the wired thermostats. Okay, looking at the console. The console is a 4-wire connection. It's labelled console on the upper screw-down terminal block. You've got 12-volt ground and A and B. It's an RS485 2-wire bus, so the cables can be nice and long. And that's how it wires in and off, and of course it's battery backed up, so if the power goes off, your console is still live to be able to control the system. Typically you would always have one of these somewhere. You have to have one. You need it for setup purposes, to get the encryption keys and set the IP address, and you typically locate this by the front door. Your main entry exit point where you leave the property, you fit one of these. It looks like an alarm panel for arming and disarming your alarm. Users are familiar with its shape and format, and we're using the flushing in back box. Looks very nice and tidy. Of course, you can have more than one. You can have lots of these keypads if you have multiple entry points that you want to be able to exit an entry from and easily arm and disarm the alarm. Not a problem. Fit one by each door. You may want one in the master bedroom as well for arming the alarm in night mode, but I'd personally rather put a touchscreen in a master bedroom because you can also access cameras and the temperature and lighting as well from the touchscreen, obviously in more user-friendly format. If you do have multiple keypads or consoles as we call them, then they do need to be addressed. They all have to have a unique address so they can coexist on the bus, and they all wire to the same terminal, or indeed you can daisy chain them, whatever is the easiest way to cable it. For the phone connection, I mentioned in the first video, you do get this junction box, comes with the Omni. And there's also an RJ45 with a cable that has some spade connectors, and it's all color coded and it's labeled on the printed circuit board for the colors, so it's impossible to get wrong. That connects the main board to the junction box, and then you can see here's your BT master coming in from the road. Your telephone connection connects to these 2 terminals. The 2 wires connect to there and there on the red and green, the minus and plus. And then the phones for the rest of the house connect on the bottom terminals, these bottom red and green here. So these terminals should facilitate the rest of the phones or PBX or whatever your telephone infrastructure is in the property. The reason for this is that the panel is able to seize the line. So should you be on the phone and the system needs to dial out in an emergency situation, then it can seize the line and then make the call and dial out and basically cut you off. That's the purpose of running your phone line through the box in that way. PIRs are obviously an important part of security systems, and are normally require 4 wires, 2 wires for power and 2 wires for signal. Always use, in my opinion, 8 conductor alarm cable. You don't need them all, but just in case a core breaks or you want to add something else like a camera at that location, it's handy to have some spare cores. So always use 8 conductor alarm cable. I know it costs more, but it's worth it for that future proofing. You use that for the console keypad, and the bell boxes and the PIRs and door contacts, all the security devices. So as you can see, I've got 12 volt and ground coming off the auxiliary power up here to the PIR, and I've got 2 wires going into a zone. And there is a requirement to set a zone type for each of the zones. So a zone type for a PIR is typically night interior or away interior. Night interior is where no one should be at night, which are for the PIRs downstairs. And away interior is where no one should be when you're away, which are for the PIRs upstairs. The PIRs also, all the sensors require a 1k ohm resistor in them. The idea is that this cable here this connection is monitored by the panel. So in order to be able to detect if someone cuts the cable or strips the cable back and uses croc clips to short the 2 wires together, we need to be able to detect that in that sort of tampering situation. So to do that, we put a 1k ohm resistor in the PIR, not back at the panel, at the PIR end. And basically the system is running a little current through those wires all the time, checking the impedance. And at 1k ohms, it's secure. At 0, if someone cuts the cable, that's infinite impedance, that's alarm state. Or if someone strips the wires back and shorts them together, that's 0 ohms, that's alarm state. So only 1k ohms is secure, and that way the panel can detect if someone cuts the cable or messes with it in any way, shape or form. That's called end-of-line resistance. We'll touch more on that in a minute on some of the other aspects of it. Door contacts, door and window contacts are obviously important as well. These tend to be passive devices. It's got a little magnet in it and a relay switch. And when you have one on the door frame, one on the door, when they're together, then it's secure, and when they separate, then it's not ready, or it's an alarm state. So 2 wires, don't need any power. 2 wires will handle this, and again, you need a 1k ohm resistor buried inside that little door contact, so that when it's secure, it's offering 1k ohm resistance to the system. That way, the door's closed. If the door opens, or if anyone cuts the wires or shorts them together in an attempt to bypass it, then it goes into alarm, which is not ready state. The zone types for these will either be entry, exit, or perimeter. An entry-exit zone is a door where you will be entering or exiting the property from, and that will trigger the entry delay when you come home and open the door. If an entry-exit zone trips, you get your entry delay time to enter your code into the keypad to disable the alarm. A perimeter is typically a window. If you put them on windows, then if they trip, then the alarm just goes off immediately. There's no entry delay. There's no opportunity to enter a code. So you put them on windows where people basically should not be coming into the building from. Now then, I mentioned we'll touch on the resistance aspect a bit more. This is called double end-of-line resistance. We've already covered off the fact that the system requires 1k ohms to be secure, and 0 resistance or infinite resistance is alarm, where someone cuts the cable or shorts them together. But we also, PIRs and devices have tampers on them. So if someone unscrews it and removes the cover to inspect it and see what they can see, how can bypass it, then the cover being lifted off triggers a tamper. And there's normally a tamper as well where it's against the wall. If someone pulls a PIR off the wall, that normally triggers a tamper as well. So how do we handle that and be able to distinguish between those different signals? So that's where we have a tamper resistor as well as the end-of-line resistor. So in summary, if the controller sees no impedance or infinite impedance, it's alarm. If it sees 1k ohm, it's secure. And if it sees 3.7k ohms, it's tamper. So how we wire that is like this. Just looking at this diagram here, where you've got a normally closed contact. This is where the alarm is basically it's a switch, and it's normally closed, open for alarm. So when it's closed and secure, our current runs down here through the 1k ohm resistor, and it gets to this point. Going through this resistance here is hard work. It's like going uphill. So the current won't go through this side. It'll take the path of least resistance, which is this side. So our current is just flowing around like that. Therefore, it's offering 1k ohm resistance. That's secure. If the PIR detects motion, this switch opens, and you've now got an open circuit. That's alarm. If someone takes the cover off the PIR, then this switch opens. The current can no longer take this path because that's now open circuit. It has to go down through here and through this 2.7k ohm resistor, and therefore giving you a total impedance of 3.7k. So that when we see that back at the controller, we know it's a tamper scenario. So between open circuit and closed circuit is alarm, 1k ohm is secure, 3.7k ohm is tamper. This diagram here shows you what would happen, or how you would wire a sensor that's normally open. You may well take over a project and replace the alarm panel with the Omni, and reusing other people's PIRs, and you discover that they're actually normally open rather than normally closed, i.e. the switch is open, and when it detects motion, it closes. So to wire that, you put the end-of-line resistor in parallel with the alarm switch rather than in series. So again, my current will flow. It can't go through here. That's normally open. The current flows through the resistor and through here. That's 1k ohm. If I'm in alarm, this will now close, and the current will flow, take the path of least resistance through here, and it's now 0 ohms. That's alarm. If someone tampers with it, then my current will go through here, 1k, and then 2.7, giving it 3.7k, and now I know it's tamper. So we can handle either normally open or normally closed sensors. You may want to put multiple sensors onto a single zone. Let's say it's a big kitchen and you want to have 3 or 4 sensors on one kitchen as one zone. You may have lots of zones, and you're trying to fit lots of them onto a single board. For whatever reason, you can do that. With a normally closed sensor, then you would simply put them all in series along here, and only have one 1k ohm resistor on the last one, on one of the PIRs. Don't put them in every single one, otherwise it'll accumulate. So you just have one resistor on one of the PIRs, all of the sensors in series, and if any of them trip, it opens circuits. If they're normally open, you'd put them all together here in parallel. So you could put multiple sensors here, again one end of line resistor on one of them. So if they're all secure, they're all open, and the current's going through the resistor. If any of them trip, one of them will close, and then you short circuit, and then it's alarm. Of course, you'll need the tamper on each of the devices. The other possible scenario, which is this confusing diagram here, is what if I've got a combination, very highly unlikely, you have a combination of normally open and normally closed sensors in a property that you want to basically wire all into one zone. Well, you can do that as well. Put the normally open ones in parallel and the normally closed ones in series with the end of line resistor. So if this one trips, it opens circuits, and if this one trips, it short circuits. Either way, it's an alarm condition. To be secure, that one must be open and that one must be closed. Hope that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, please feel free to grab the slider at the bottom of the video and rewind and listen to that again. It is important you understand how end-of-line resistance works. When you're on site up a ladder, wiring a PIR in, scratching your head, you'll be very glad that you took the time to understand how end-of-line resistance works, to not have to spend hours and hours trying to figure it out when you're on site. Make sure you understand it now. Excuse me. The PIR that we stock is the LC100. This PIR, that's at least at this time of making the video. It may all change. But the LC100 has got 2 terminals here for tamper. It's got a normally closed, a common, and there is just a spare terminal for wiring things into, for making junctions perhaps, and then you've got the power connections. So you can see the yellow and the red, the yellow and the blue, the red and the black are the power. The yellow and the blue are for my alarm signal, and this is wired in as a normally closed, as per the previous diagram. So my current comes in the yellow. The tamper is normally closed, so the current goes straight across that switch, and then it goes up through this resistor, which is the 1k ohm resistor, and comes down into the normally closed contact. So this switch is normally closed, and then the current can go back down the blue wire. So it comes down the yellow, through here, through the 1k ohm resistor, and back through the blue. So when it's secure, we're offering 1k ohm. When the PIR trips, then this normally closed switch opens, which means my current is then can't go through. It's open circuit. That's alarm. If the tamper is tripped and the cover is lifted off and the tamper trips, then the tamper switch is normally closed. So this will open when it's tampered, forcing the current to go through this 2.7k ohm resistor, and then the 1k ohm resistor, and then back, giving it 3.7k. So that kind of it represents what I told you before on the previous wiring diagram, but in real life on a real PIR. Obviously the left hand resistor is 2.7, the right hand resistor is 1k, and my yellow and blue wires are wired back to a zone on the panel. Smoke detectors, very useful to add smoke detectors to the project. Obviously, a lot of people just have battery-powered smoke detectors that batteries get removed, and when the batteries get low, it starts beeping, and people take them out. Whereas these smoke detectors off the panel are permanently powered from the panel, and of course, battery backed up from the battery backing up the main panel. So you can see I've got 4 wires to it, 12 volt and ground going to the smoke detector to power it permanently, and then I've got the smoke detection switch wired into a zone. With this one, you set the zone type in the software to be fire, and obviously when this detects smoke, it will then tell the controller through that 2-wire contact switch, and the system will go into alarm, and it will know it's smoke because it's the zone type is set to smoke. So when the alarm is going off, it will be reporting fire rather than burglary. This is not a fully rated fire alarm system. Do not sell this as a fully rated fire alarm system. This is a smoke detection system. So just be careful not to overstep your bounds. Commercial fire alarm systems have to have smoke fireproof cable and all sorts of stuff. This is a smoke detection capability, and the other benefit, of course, is the system can phone you up and let you know that your house is burning down, which of course battery powered smoke detectors won't do. You'll find out when you get home. So don't forget the 1k ohm resistor is required within the circuit to offer 1k ohm when it's secure and not in alarm state. to make life easy, always wire smoke detectors in from zone 5 onwards. You can put them on zone 1 to 4. It's a different wiring, and they're jumpers that need setting. If you need to do that, let us know. We've got a knowledge-based article which will show you how to do it. But to make life easy, put it on zone 5 and above. We can also handle 2-wire smoke detectors if you really have to use them, but they're just more complicated and unnecessary. So I would say stick to 4-wire smokes and wire them in zone 5 and onwards. Going to talk now about our wireless sensors, which allow you to add wireless zones to a project. If you're adding any wireless sensors to a project, you will need the wireless transceiver, which is this guy here. This will receive signals from the wireless sensors. This wires onto the console bus, the same ports that the keypad wires into. Again, a 4-wire. 12-volt ground and A and B. Again, it's RS485, so the cables can be long runs. You can put it wherever you like, and again use your 8-core alarm cable for this, and position it nice and centrally in the house to get good wireless signal. If it's a big project, you'll have used an Omni Pro 2, and an Omni Pro 2 can actually have 2 wireless receivers. So you can locate them around the property to get good signal coverage. It does use 400 megahertz, which is a low frequency signal, compared to Wi-Fi, which is 2.4 gigahertz. It doesn't go through walls very well, quite lossy. This is 0.4 gigahertz, so it's very low frequency in comparison, and will go through walls and is much less lossy than sort of wireless we're used to with Wi-Fi. So I can have 2 of these on a Pro to increase my signal coverage, or I can have 2 of these on a Pro to double the number of sensors, because each one of these will support 64 wireless sensors. If I have 2 of them on a Pro, I can then have 128 wireless sensors. So I can have a lot of wireless sensors in a very large system here. If it's a 2E or an LTE, then I can only have 16. So 16 wired and 16 wireless on those platforms. And there's other funky things I can do as well. I can have 4 wireless sensors going back to one, mimicking one zone or reporting to one zone. So if I want to collate them together, I can do that as well. So I have some other useful mechanisms there. But I have to have one of those for the wireless. And here are the sort of range of wireless sensors available to you. Just going to run through them quickly. In the top left here, we've got the wireless tilt sensor. This is typically used on an up and over garage door, where you can put it on the door, and as the door goes up and goes horizontal, then that trips a little mercury switch. But also inside here is a screw down terminal, where you can also wire in any volt-free contact. So any third-party sensor can be incorporated into the system wirelessly by wiring it into this sensor. Maybe there's a particular PIR you need to use, or there is a particular maybe a light beam sensor or something. You can make it wireless by wiring the volt-free output from that third-party sensor into the wireless tilt sensor, and it basically wireless enables it. The next one is the PIR, PetImmune PIR. Then we have a nice door sensor here, which is fully invisible when the door's closed. You drill a hole in the door and drop this barrel in, drill a hole in the door frame and pop the magnet in. So when the door's closed, it's completely concealed. You can't see it, you can't get access to it. So that's quite nice. Then we have 2 door window sensors. They're really the same concept, where you've got 2 bits to it. One goes on the door frame, one goes on the door, and when they're together, it's secure. When they're separate, they're not ready. It's just this one is sort of white and chamfered edges to blend in with UPVC windows, and this one isn't. But they both perform the same function. This one here is quite interesting. It's great little, again, a concealed door sensor. You can put that in the door frame on the hinge side, and when the door closes, it pushes the button, which is obviously secure, and when the door opens, the button releases, which is then in alarm state. And then down here we have another little wireless window sensor. Again, it's designed for UPVC windows, where the frame is normally a box section, and you can drill a hole in the first layer that doesn't penetrate into the damp layer or anything, because that's the second layer. You can normally drill into the box section, and you can fit this into the box section on the inside of the window frame. There's a little magnet you attach to the window itself, so you've got a very, very discreet wireless window sensor here. Just going to jump over to this one here, which is the break glass detection. This is basically got a microphone in it, which is tuned to the sound of breaking glass. So if you have a big bay window or end of a room that's got just covered in glass, you can fit this on the opposite side of the room, and if that glass is smashed, then that triggers the sensor with the break glass. Again, wireless, and these are all battery powered. That's all the security sensors. Then I have other sensors really more for automation. This is a wireless driveway sensor, which will detect large metal objects moving in the Earth's magnetic field. This sensor might be used to turn on your driveway lights, perhaps, if a car drives down the driveway, and that object is detected. So you might use that for those sorts of automation tasks. The next one is a little 4-button keypad. You might use this where you have perhaps forgotten a keypad, or maybe in a garage you want to be able to open a garage door, or perhaps want to turn some lights on from a location where you haven't got a keypad. Then you could fit this. It's flat, it's flush, it's flat. You can just 3M tape it to a wall, and you've got 4 buttons on it, which you can program to do things through automation programming. But there's actually 8 functions, because you have got 2-button combinations as well. So by clicking 2-button combinations, you can actually get 8 functions out of that particular device. Same with the key fob. The key fob's got 4 buttons, but again, 2-button combinations gives you 8 functions. Could be alarm, arm the alarm, disarm the alarm, open, release the door, turn lights on, whatever you like. And the last one is a single button pendant, more designed for care at home applications, where a disabled or elderly person might wear that pendant around their neck, and if they have a problem or they're have some sort of issue, they can press the button, and then the system can call out to the caring company to then come round and assist the individual. So all of these wireless sensors are all battery powered, very, very useful for retrofit. Sadly, however, none of the security sensors we've talked about here are graded. So if you do need police response, you cannot use any of the wireless sensors. You have to stick to wired sensors for a graded system. But if it doesn't require police response, then that's absolutely fine. You can use the wireless sensors as you see fit, and not have any problems. To mate up the various sensors to the wireless receiver, there's a little procedure you have to go through. The cover pops off the bottom of the wireless receiver, and there's 2 buttons. You press and hold the mode button for a couple of seconds, and it shows A1 on the display. That's where you label the receivers. If you have 2 of them, you label one A1 and the other one A2. And then you press it again and you get N1. That's the mode that it's in. That's where you got all those funky modes I mentioned. You can have multiple sensors reporting to one zone, but leave it on N1 for the purpose of this discussion. And then you press the mode button again, and now it will say a number 1. That's address number 1. And if it's used, there'll be dots at the bottom, at the bottom of where the 1 is. And if it's not used, there'll be no dots. So if that's a free address, you can use that. If not, just keep pressing the mode button until you get to the next free address. And then to make the sensor into that address, you simply trigger the sensor. In this door contacts point of view, you just remove the 2 pieces and put them back together again, and then that will trigger it, and then that will mate that sensor into that address. Press the mode button again to go to the next address and enroll the next sensor in, and repeat until all the sensors are enrolled into the system. and then press and hold the mode button to exit the setup mode. Sounders. Here we have a range of internal sounders and an external sounder. You may have one or two external sounders on the project. We'll show you how to wire that in a second. Internal sounders are very important as well, especially if you have smoke detectors. You must have internal sounders on every floor if you have smoke detectors. The smoke detectors do not have sirens in them. Generally, we don't advise that because they draw too much current. So you have non-siren smoke detectors, and you're using the sounder to go off when it detects smoke. This one's very good here. This little recessed one, size of a downlight. Pop that in the ceiling on the landing. You need to have 80 decibels to the bedroom door for smoke detection. So put that in the landing. And one in the hallway, and perhaps another one in the kitchen, maybe above the kitchen cabinets. You don't want to see them, keep them out of sight. This little guy is also very small and quite handy just to wire into maybe even inside the cabinet, so that there's a tamper on the cabinet. Someone opens the door, then it'll sound very loudly. So the internal sounders are just 2-wire, and they wire onto the ground and internal siren connections here. They're very simple. The external siren's a bit more complicated. This is external, so it has to be supervised, so it can't be tampered with, and is battery backed up as well. So it has got a battery inside. You wire the permanent 12 volt, which is battery backed up from the Omni battery. You wire that 12 volt onto the 12 volt power, and that will charge its internal battery. Then the external sounder output, you can wire that onto the strobe and the bell terminals, so both the strobe and the bell will go off when 12 volt is applied here, when it's an alarm. And there's also a tamper on the cover and on the back, so if the unit is ripped off the wall or the cover's open, there's a tamper which you can wire into a zone, and don't forget your 1k ohm resistor, which you need to keep in the bell box end, not at the panel end. Just a word of warning, so this is supervised. If the power, if it's ripped off the wall, then it will detect its power loss, and it will start sounding immediately based on its battery backup. And also the tampers will trip, informing the Omni that it's been tampered with, and put the Omni into alarm as well, and dial out and call the monitoring station or call the owner and show tamper on the touchscreens and the like. You do need this 1k ohm resistor up here as well. So I said it's 12 volt applied when it's an alarm, but there's also about 8 volts on there permanently, sending a current through here to supervise to make sure it's still there. And on some of the newer models of sounders, that's enough to actually set the alarm off, because they're getting more and more efficient nowadays. So a 1k ohm resistor across the ground and external sounder terminals will drop a bit of voltage across the resistor, and be enough just to drop it low enough so as not to actually make the sounder go off all the time. You may need the same on the internal sounder as well. If you have a sounder that's very, very sensitive, then the supervisory voltage will be enough to make it sound permanently, or maybe even just chirp every now and then. Just put a 1k ohm resistor across there, and that'll eliminate that. Okay, we're going to have a little look at the programming side of things now on PC Access and how we set that up. This is using the PC Access software that you were introduced to on the introduction video. I'm just going to show you the bits relating to the alarm in this module, and then we'll come back to it for other areas in later training modules. So the first area here is codes. Under codes, this is where you put all your users for the system. So have a separate code for each person. So mum, dad, and all the children, cleaner, housekeeper, neighbours. Give them all separate codes, because it's all logged. So whoever arms and disarms the alarm, their name is logged. If you give one code for the whole house, you lose all that traceability. So you have a separate code for each user. You can't see the codes. You can see the only options I've got for active codes is to disable them, which will delete them. If I want to, when it comes, all of them are blank to start with. What you do is you ask the customer, you click on the enable button, and then you look away and ask the customer to enter their code and select OK. And then it will be active. It's important you don't know the codes for the users. That way you cannot be accused of ever breaking in and disabling the alarm because you don't actually know the codes. That's a very important aspect here. Along here you've got other settings like user level, where you've got user, manager and master. These different settings only really give you access to the dial-in facilities, which don't tend to get used very much nowadays anyway, because we have the iPhone and Android apps. So you can just set codes as users. There will always be, the first code will always be a master code, and you can't change that. You can also specify time of day as to when these codes are allowed to be used. So if you give the code to the cleaner, you can actually specify her code might only work on a Tuesday, let's say, and you can specify that it'll work from 10 a.m. on a Tuesday until 12 p.m. So during that 2-hour window when the cleaner normally arrives, I've done that for Mum, but you get the idea, then that's a good way of increasing the security of the property, so the cleaner can't come in at the weekend. So that's where you enter all your codes, and as you can see, you can have up to 99 users on the system. Dialing. This is where you set the system up for dial out to be able to, once you've connected it to the phone line, telephone access you put to yes. If you want, you can have the system answer incoming calls. Before the age of apps, you would typically dial into the system and use a telephone menu and press 1 for security and 2 for temperature and 3 for lighting. Not really used much now that we have the smartphone apps. So you might want to leave the answer outside calls to no. And that's obviously remote commands from a touch tone phone, a number of rings before answer, so you're probably not going to use any of those. But for dialing out, you can basically put up to 8 numbers, and you can specify what times of day these numbers are valid for. So if you just put one number in here, and you only want it to call one number, then you just put a 1 in there, and it's just going to dial number 1. If I had another number in here, then, and I want it to dial first number, then the second number, I'll put a 1, then a 2. I think that's missing a number. Nope. You get the idea. So this basically gives you the dial sequence of how many numbers that have to be called. I have 2 of them here because I have 2 areas, which I'll come to next. Areas. This allows me to actually create multiple virtual alarms. On a Pro, I can have 8 areas. So these are areas that can be individually armed or disarmed individually. So you might think these are partitions, might be a term you may have used in other alarm systems. But here I've got an example of house and garage. So I can arm the garage alarm, and all it involves is putting a PIR or a door sensor or something on the garage, and I can create that as a separate virtual alarm system, and I can arm and disarm that completely separately from the main house, which is quite useful. If I come down to arming, these are some parameters, and you can see I can customize those individually for the 2 areas. And indeed, if I set it up for 8 areas, then I come to arming, and I'll have 8. So I can customize these things totally individually. Here I've got arming method, timed, exit door, shunt lock, and push button. So timed, basically when I arm the alarm, it'll beep during the exit delay of 60 seconds it's set to, and after 60 seconds it will then be fully armed. I can also use an exit door mechanism where I could arm the alarm as I walk out the door. When an entry-exit zone becomes secure, then the alarm will arm at that point. Shunt lock is where I can actually have a lock in the door that when I actually lock it, that arms and disarms the alarm. And a push button is an external button where I can walk out the door and press a button and that arms the alarm. So these are all mechanisms for arming the alarm. And I've got the same for disarming. I've only got the option there for timed or shunt lock. So timed, when I trip an entry-exit zone, I have got 30 seconds on my entry delay. This is customizable. I can change this to enter the code before the alarm sounds. Or if it's a shunt lock mechanism, then by unlocking it, then that actually disarms the alarm for me. So I've got these mechanisms. Audible exit delay is set to yes by default. That means it's beeping during the exit delay. Entry chime, perimeter chime are set to yes and yes by default. This means whenever a perimeter zone is tripped or an entry exit zone is tripped, even when the alarm is not armed, you get a little beep from the console. Most people would turn those off in a residential property. You may use that in a more commercial application when you want to know that someone's walked in the front door. All on for alarm, that's lighting. So if your alarm goes off, all your lights come on that are set up to be enabled for the all on function. That's very powerful. If a burglar were to break in downstairs, 55% of burglaries happen when the homeowner's in the house in bed at night. If someone were to break in downstairs, the alarm goes off and all the lights come on full, that is probably going to make the burglar simply turn around and run away, which is what you want the system to do. So all on for alarm is good. That turns all your lights on when the alarm goes off. Beep on trouble, that makes the console beep if there's any issues with any of the problems where maybe a wireless sensor battery dies or battery goes low, and it warns you of that, and it beeps, and you can go to the console, read the message and acknowledge the message. Exit time restart. This basically allows that if you arm the alarm and exit the building and you're using timed mode, if you re-enter the building during the exit delay from an entry-exit zone because you've forgotten your mobile phone, you've left it on the kitchen worktop, then the entry-exit delay restarts and starts again to give you enough time to get to the kitchen, to get your phone and get back out the door again. Unvacated premises is set to yes by default. Basically, when you arm the alarm is expecting to see an entry-exit zone be violated or be opened, a door opened and then closed. If the entry-exit zone is not triggered during the exit delay, it assumes you're in the house still, and it reverts the alarm to day mode rather than away mode. You can turn that off if you want to. If you don't want that feature, you can just hit no, and it won't do that anymore. Zones. This is where you set up all of your security zones, your PIRs and your door contacts. So here you simply give them names, you just click and you can then type in a name for each of the security zones. You can see hall PIR, kitchen PIR. Voice is where you can actually give it a voice so that where the alarm is going off, it can announce that the hall sensor has been tripped, or when the alarm system phones you up, it will tell you burglar alarm, hall sensor tripped. So by giving it sensible words within the voice column, the system will be able to actually tell you over the phone which sensor. You've got a very large vocabulary of words here, and as you can see, it's pretty quick just to set up the right phrase for each of the sensors. Zone type is really important. This is how the alarm will behave. There are lots and lots of zone types to choose from. If you're ever in doubt, you can go to the help menu and look at the help, and it gives you a description of what all these different zone types are. However, the only ones you're ever going to use probably is entry-exit for your front door and entry-exit points. Interior away is for PIRs where no one should be when you're away, which are the upstairs ones. And night interior are for PIRs where no one should be at night, which are the downstairs ones. Perimeter, you're probably going to use perimeter on your door, on your windows, which are basically no one should be coming into the house through the window. And tamper for if you've got the tamper circuit on the bell box, for example. Remember, the tamper on PIRs is built into the zone. You haven't got to have a separate zone for tampers for PIRs, using the dual end of line resistance method I showed you. But where you may have a tamper on a bell box, you're going to use that, and you may well have panic buttons throughout the property as well. And you might use fire for your smoke detectors. They're probably the only ones you're ever going to use. You may well, but as you can see, you may well have a freeze watch detector, a gas detector. That might be a carbon monoxide detector. And by setting the zone types appropriately, you get the right information when the alarm goes off and the alarm phones you up and tells you what the problem is. There's even a water detector down there as well if you have a water sensor. So that's really important to get the zone types. As you can see in this example, I've got night interiors for all my PIRs, apart from the landing PIRs and away interior. And these are all wired zones, 1 to 16. And right down here, zone 49, I've got my front door. The reason is the wireless zones start at 49 onwards. Zones 1 to 48 are reserved for wired from the 16 on the main board. And you can add 2 more 16 zone daughter boards, can't you, to the main board, giving you 48 wired zones. The wireless zones and expansion enclosures start at zone 49. So I've got a wireless front door sensor here, set to entry-exit. Let's imagine I added a PIR for the garage, because we have that other area. I might call it garage PIR, and this one is going to be a way interior, so it's triggered when when I'm away. It'll be active when I arm that in away mode, and all I've got to do is set the area to garage, and now that PIR is on the garage alarm and not the house alarm. Looking across here, I've got some other menu items. Cross zoning. Here I can actually associate multiple sensors together, so that if one trips, it's not a real zone activation until the other one trips within a period of 30 seconds, or whatever I set the timer to be. So you kind of correlate the two together to avoid false activations. Swinger shutdown is disabled by default. This is where you can set it if a PIR or a zone keeps tripping the alarm over and over again, it can be shut down automatically to avoid false call-outs. This might be the swinger shutdown name has come from maybe a window swinging in the wind, so you can shut down that zone automatically. Dial out delay. This is where you delay the dial out to the monitoring station. And it's enabled for all of the zones. If there's a particular zone you do not want a dial out delay on, it will actually just dial out immediately as soon as that zone triggers an alarm. You can disable that. But entry exit follower is the really important one. This is where you can, if you have maybe in this example, the front door will be my entry-exit zone, but I've also got a PIR in the hall by the front door. So it may be that I have to walk past this PIR to get to the keypad to disable the alarm. Or as I'm going to the keypad, I'm going to trip that PIR. So by enabling that as a follower, the alarm doesn't go off as soon as that PIR trips. So I've opened the front door, I trip the entry exit delay, it starts beeping at me, I can walk in, I can walk past that PIR, no problem. The alarm is still in the entry delay, I've got enough time to enter my code. Whereas if someone walked past the kitchen PIR during the entry delay, the alarm would start sounding immediately, because that's not an entry exit zone and it's not a follower. So that's quite useful for dealing with those situations. Under dealer settings here, this is where I add expansion enclosures. I can have up to 8 expansion enclosures, and my wireless 64 zone wireless, it counts as an expansion enclosures. In fact, a 64 zone counts as 4 expansion enclosures, because each expansion enclosure is 16 zones. So I've only added 1 expansion enclosure, and that's given me an extra 16. If I add 4, it gives me 64 more zones that I can have wirelessly. There's my cross-zoning timer and my swinger shutdown, how many times it would swing before, trigger before shutting down. Also, going to jump down into the wonderful miscellaneous settings. Not going to go through all of these, but some of the key highlights that might be useful to you to know is this is where the installer code is set, which you really want to change after you've installed a system, so that it's away from default. Do not leave a system on the default installer code. Flash for alarm. When the alarm goes off, lighting circuit number 2 will flash. You might use this on the porch or the gates, so that authorities can, as they're driving by, they can see, or the security company, they can see the property quickly because the gate lights are flashing when the alarm goes off. But importantly, out siren delay. By default, when the alarm goes off, the external siren will not go off for 15 seconds. And dial out delay, when the alarm goes off, it will not dial out to the monitoring station for 30 seconds. These things basically give you an opportunity to disarm the alarm should you have accidentally tripped it. Siren reset minutes. This is after the siren's gone off permanently, been going live for 6 minutes, it will stop and reset itself. But the actual full alarm reset window is 30 minutes. So if you have multiple triggers within that window, then it's deemed a confirmed alarm. Alarm restore level, you can basically set it such that if the alarm has triggered, only the installer can reset it, or the user can reset it. And you can reverse the siren polarity to handle sirens that use minus 12 volts rather than positive 12 volts. And you've obviously got the option here for siren configurations on tamper, and you've got supervised, whether the siren is supervised via that voltage on the output there as well. So you've got a few things here. Don't worry about the dial out, deadline detect and off hook detect. Leave those at default. That's basically parameters for monitoring the telephone line. Only change those under advice from technical support. That's probably the key things. The only other thing would be digital communicator. This is where you've got a monitoring station. So should you actually have a third-party monitoring station, you'd put their phone number in there and your account number in there. And the system will then dial out to the monitoring station first. And when it's delivered its information to the monitoring station, it will then follow whatever you've put in here to call you afterwards. You get second priority after the monitoring station. You can have up to 2 monitoring stations set up for redundancy purposes. You can give the monitoring station two-way audio using the audio two-way voice card. You can specify whether or not the system should dial out, say maybe on a Monday at 12 p.m. noon. You can have the system dial out and do a test call for the monitoring station once a week. Report, bypass and restores is if any zones are bypassed, then it reports it to the monitoring station. Report open and closes is it's reporting when the alarm is armed or disarmed. And AC failure report time is 60 seconds after the power's failed is when it should report it to the monitoring station. As you can see, quite a lot to absorb. Feel free to hit the rewind button and go through some of that again if it didn't all sink in. Lastly, I'm just going to mention the arming modes. Obviously, it's an alarm system we're talking about on this training module. The typical modes, ways of arming the alarm, as you leave the house, you press the away button, and then it will say enter code, and you enter your code. And then it will start. If you put it to timed exit, it'll start beeping during the exit delay. You've got 3 obvious modes here: away, night, and day. So away mode, obviously leaving the house. Night mode, when you go to bed at night, and that will arm the PIRs that are the night interior type, and the way interior type, the ones upstairs, they're not active. And of course, entry exit zones and perimeters are active, of course. Day mode is if you're in the house and you want to feel secure, you can arm the alarm in day mode, and what this will do is activate all of the perimeter and door entry-exit zones, but all the PIRs will be disabled. So all the away interiors and night interiors are not functioning. And of course, when you come home and you trip the entry delay, it's beeping, you press off and you enter your code to turn the alarm off. Obviously fairly straightforward. All security actions are fully logged in the event log, so you've got that as a running history of what's going on, which is obviously critical if something does happen. There are additional modes as well that you can get access to for arming purposes from the console or the app as well, or the touchscreen. This is night delay, day instant, and vacation. Night delay is, let's say you've armed the alarm in night mode because you're going to bed, but there's someone else in the house who's still out and they're not coming home till 2 in the morning. If you arm it in night mode, the alarm will sound the minute they open the front door. If you arm it in night delay mode, then when they open the front door, it'll start beeping and give them the entry delay time to enter their code to disarm the alarm. Day instant is kind of the opposite. When you arm the alarm in day mode, when you open the front and entry exit zone, you'll get an entry delay, so you can turn the alarm off. Day instant will basically trigger the alarm off immediately as soon as you open the front door. And vacation mode is very useful. Vacation mode is exactly the same as away mode from an alarm's intruder alarm point of view. But within the programming of the automation system, you may decide to set up all sorts of lighting activity going off and on when on vacation mode to simulate occupancy. So you have the kitchen light coming on, and then the lounge light, and maybe the hall light, and then at 11 o'clock you start turning the hall and the kitchen and lounge lights off, and then the hall light and the landing light comes on, and the hall light goes off, and the bedroom light comes on, and you're basically mimicking somebody in the house following a certain pattern, and you can also vary those times as well. So when you go on holiday, you arm the alarm in vacation mode. It's still fully secure, but you've got all that automation triggering in the background that would be useful. So I hope that was useful. I'm going to bring this to an end now. Thank you very much for listening to this module. As always, there's lots of ways to contact us through our website, email, phone. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and our YouTube video channel. I look forward to speaking to you again on the next training module. Thank you for listening.